thank you to everybody who is joining us today. I'll do introductions with Mike and myself in just a moment. But Mike, we got a slide up here, and it was current as of like a week ago, where we've got Zoom calls and protests and murder hornets. And now apparently, I don't know if you heard this, but even today, as everybody races to the future, not everyone's doing it really well. Did you read about the university, the Southern University, and their work from home policy? You're on mute.
I am not on mute.
No,
Can you hear me now?
I can't.
How about now? There we go. Has that ever happened on a webinar? No. I did see that. I would say that was not a brilliant move, supporting people with families and building culture in their organization. For those of you who maybe don't know, a very large university said that their stay-at-home employees were not allowed to do child care, that somehow they were going to magically enforce that they weren't going to do that. So as we're quickly learning as we go forward with this new process of managing work, some people are doing it better than others. I would say that maybe that was a miss on their part.
So literally, I can't keep this slide up to date in 2020. And yeah, I was floored. University says if you're staying at home, you can't take care of your kids during the day. And I just want to know, if benefits are going to cover the lifetime of therapy that these kids are going to need, because mommy's home, and I just asked her for lunch, and I got her fired. Like, it's just, who thinks? So hopefully today we're going to talk a little bit about a better path into this new normal that we're in. And Mike, let me introduce you formally. Mike Psenka, CEO of Movila, making the smartest project management software on the market. And I know we're going to talk a lot about how and what sits behind it and why. Personally, I've been impressed with what I've seen with your software. It goes beyond a lot of what I see in the market with kind of the standard project management fare to really get into execution and driving out friction from project plans. So I want to talk to you about that. Your previous company, Authority, was acquired by Equifax. Congratulations. I know your company, it helps organizations stay compliant with ACA. And now I might be going out on a limb here, but I see helps companies stay compliant with ACA. You currently have a company that helps on the execution side of things. Was there something about that experience that maybe got you to see know what to do? Yeah, there's no question. And I think that sort of opened my eyes and our eyes that sort of large-scale collaboration and working was still pretty fundamentally broken. And that sort of we were sort of continuing to repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. So, there's deja vu all over.
No question that was a driver.
And for everybody listening, my name is Jason Seiden. I come to today by way of a career in communications and leadership. I was a consultant for a million years. I then became an entrepreneur, hung up the consulting hat, built a piece of technology. So if you're thinking of quitting your day job, all I can say is don't. But that's a different conversation for a different day. My last company, some of you may know it, it was in the HR space. It was called Brand Amper. It was acquired in 2017 by the Muse. We provided a scalable and measurable way for companies to collect employee stories and turn those into employer branding and recruitment marketing concepts. So, Mike, I love everything about your background. I love the fact that I'm not looking at the Golden Gate Bridge on the slide. I'm not looking at the Bay Bridge. You're based in Charleston. You've got an execution-focused company, and literally everything that you seem to be doing to even set the company up is focused on execution. So we can agree on this. But talk to me for a second. What's behind it? We're all kidding aside. What is the premise of Movila, and what is the goal in terms of how you'd like to be helping companies take the step into the brave new world?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So I think, when I started the company, maybe it was 7 years ago now, I knew that we were in a long R&D cycle for almost 5 years. And I knew that we were going to be, and that's sort of different than most sort of early stage businesses, because you sort of go, let's kind of put a new piece of cute software out there because there's a hype cycle around it. collaboration, work management, and communication has been around forever, but so are the problems associated with it. And, we stopped and said, hey, we want to take a scientific and mathematical approach to this problem because it's not getting solved. It's still leading to headaches and people just assuming this project's going to go sideways. It's going to go sideways. Big projects always go sideways, of course. They're always late. There's always problems. And that just seemed odd to accept that as a fact. And so our focus became, look, it is, if you do a really good job executing, you get to go home early. You get to have more free time. You get to focus. You get to focus on quality instead of minutia. There were so many benefits, but it just seemed like there were some really deep root causes that people weren't paying attention to. So we, like I said, we spent a long time studying and looking in and researching that and where we are today as a result of that process of how to do that and how to.
I have to laugh because it's a challenge that I've been looking at for over 20 years from an HR standpoint. And true story, once upon a time, I had a client, when I had my consulting practice, I had a client in an aerospace company. So I'm doing training, and I have people in the room who had been in Houston, right? Like Houston, we have a problem, Houston. I had an astronaut in the room. I had jet fighters in the room, folks who had retired from the military and were now on the corporate side of things. And I was talking about human nature and where people trip up getting things done. And I remember it very clearly. There's a simple conversation around reinforcement, right? So I do something and you can respond positively, negatively, or you can ignore me. They were not getting it. And right, of course, like the rocket scientists don't get this. And here's the beautiful thing. I tell them that. I'm like, what you guys do is hard. What we do is easy. And like, let's not overcomplicate it. And this guy says, I beg to differ. And I look in the room, and of course, it's the astronaut. The guy's been in space. And I'm thinking, I'm about to have a career-defining story about how a rocket scientist doesn't get the basics of human nature. And I will never forget what he told me because I have the opposite story of what I thought. What he said was, in about maybe 70 years after Kitty Hawk, we put a man on the moon. In all of recorded history, I'm not sure that mankind has ever gotten this stuff right. And I called for a break very quickly, but it did kind of impress upon me the fact that until very recently, we simply didn't have the ability to really understand this problem in a way that would make it solvable. The way that HR has historically looked at this is to say, look, we just need better people. We've got an execution issue. What do we do now? I don't know, but let's put some smart people in the room and they'll figure it out. And you have a different take on this, and you've actually, you've been focused for these last 5 or so years on not only understanding it, but bringing the solution to market. And I would love for you to kind of talk to me and talk to us about what this problem of, like, how come even teams of A players can't get stuff done and they operate like C teams? What's going on?
Yeah. So I guess I'll say a couple of things. One, as we move forward as a society, our ability to sort of observe and measure ourselves give us new insights to lead better, more productive lives. And I think sort of a really good example of that is, you use the 70-year, I often will use a different 70 years differentiation, which is 70 years ago, we had ads out there of Santa Claus with cigarettes in his mouth, and you're wondering which brand of cigarettes your doctor smoked, because we went, oh, God, it can't be that bad for you. My doctor smokes. And now that's an absurd notion, right? We have the information. We have data and information that says, oh my God, like, you want to do like one of the worst possible things, go ahead and smoke. And so, but the reality is, we do that all the time. There are lots of things we're doing today that in 70 years we're going to slap ourselves in the head and go, oh my God, I can't believe how blind we were today. Yeah, exactly. So there is an issue right now when we think about work and collaboration where it's nothing malicious intent, but when you talk about A players playing as a C team, there's a mathematical principle that sort of underlies this that we call the project paradox. And really what it says, and this is a simple discrete math problem. It's actually really simple. It's just coin flip math, to be honest with you. So this is not fancy math. It's simple math. The odds of flipping heads twice in a row is 25%, right? 0.5 times
I
0.5.
gotta see. Look, like I am no slouch, and I got a C on my my probability test in high school. To this day, it burns me. So I'm actually really happy to do right. Like simple for you, absolutely. Right?
Yeah. Well, and so you raise you raise a good point. Like our focus is to not have people have to deal with the math. You know, our focus has always been to wrap the math problem in an elegant experience for users so they can get the value of it. But it's really important to understand the math for large-scale enterprises, and for those folks who are on the phone today that work in large organizations, the math is really bad. It's really against you. And so Jason's point about A players playing like their C team, if you have a team of people who get their work done on time 99% of the time, which I think we'd say that would be like A triple plus. Yeah, A triple plus performance. If they had 30 tasks in a project in the critical path, there's only a 74% chance they're going to get that done. And when you start to get to more realistic numbers like 95% or 90%, you can see it drops to F pretty fast. And that's the reality we live in. So this was the epiphany that we made 5 years ago, which was this math is the dragon that you have to do battle with. And that became our goal, our focus around execution. When you were saying execution is everything, it's to help people solve this. Because, and here's why it matters. You can say, well, the projects get done. Yeah, the projects get done because of the heroics of people and long nights and evenings and working really in an unsustainable way. And in many cases, and why it's even a bigger problem now with COVID is you have these heroics going on and no one's recognizing that those people are in the background doing it because there isn't the hallway conversation. You know, you're losing a lot of that activity. So,
right, there's no flyby. My boss's boss isn't seeing me, you know, at 8 o'clock, or you know, my boss isn't, whatever it is. I'm not walking out of a meeting looking at somebody and saying, "Hey, what didn't you say?" Because I'm not reading the tea leaves in the room, recognizing somebody's being quiet. So, I hear you. Right? There's that self-correction mechanism that happens when we all go to the beehive, so to speak, and hang out. And when you remove us, all you're left with is this the math problem. Which, if I'm understanding it right, like I hear you talk about a small individual imperfection exploding into a team problem, and all I keep thinking about is like a casino that has a tiny little edge at the table, turns that tiny edge into massive profit. And I might not
2 to
see
5
it,
percentage points. Yeah.
Right, like at any one table, I might win. Right, any given night, I might win. So I might not see what's going on, but when we're in HR and we have that bird's eye view over the entire organization, what's happening is we're like, this is like the casino is losing every time the math is against us. And now, if I'm hearing you right, I'm looking at like there's no correction, there's no mechanism to correct on that. Like we're actually going to feel it for the first time ever. That's painful. So what do we do, right? So,
well, I was just going to say one thing on the your previous point on that slide is losing the face-to-face and losing the social interaction. And human animals are very efficient about how they communicate and, as you said, course correct. In the absence of that course correction, that begins to degrade the culture of performance, right? Because those correcting actions, those small correcting actions just don't happen the way they normally do.
Ouch. Ouch. Which means we're not going to be 99% players. We're going to degrade. So what do we got to do? We look at execution as everything. If you want to jump, I would love to kind of just spend a minute on each of these and kind of talk. Obviously you've got software that drives the solution for these, but the software is driving the solution to a problem. That's a universal problem. I'd love to take just a couple minutes and just kind of break these down and actually hear your perspective on what HR needs to be doing or thinking about within each of these categories: accurate planning, connectivity, accountability, risk forecasting, and capacity planning, and like how these things are changing in the current day. And then take a couple minutes and let's take a look at like a part of Moodle and just dive into how you solve this problem. If that works for you?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, so accurate planning, let's start at the top. So I saw this referential integrity, change tolerance. Never heard the concepts before, but I've also seen the product, but I know I don't need to. And talk to us about accurate plans and where the planning process typically goes awry and why people don't feel this.
Yeah. So one of the things that we learned in our research was that, and as you see this number, 98% of existing project plans were really fundamentally flawed. And I think the way that gets experienced by people is everything is green until it all turns red. You know, the plan's going well until it turns red, and you say, well, couldn't we have known about this sooner? Oh, you could have if the plan had been set up effectively from the start. And the reality is, this isn't because people aren't good at their jobs or aren't focused. It is just their ability to visualize the plan and understand where the risks are in the plan. So it's sort of like you're leaving your house to go on vacation, but you don't have any plans or directions, or they're totally disconnected. You don't know how you're going to get from Toledo to Denver. And that's the reality, is most project plans and most project efforts start in that format. And you have to start to think about, and this is the important aspect, is as work goes forward, as Jason, as you said, because you're no longer in these face-to-face meetings, that course correction doesn't occur quickly, and these things can come off the rails, and it just compounds. That problem becomes compounded.
How much, when you were doing the digging on this, how much of this was because people don't know how to make a plan, and how much of it was because people would make a plan, they'd bring it into their boss would look at it and say, I think you can do better, and then you feel that political pressure to make it more aggressive, and now it's green, green, green until inevitably it's red because it was impossible from the start.
Well, look at what we have on the screen. Like, who on this call today would actually look at this and go, yeah, I want to tease that apart. I have any interest. So no manager is going to say, fix it, because I don't know how to inform to fix it. And the other issue is it's simply mathematically impossible for any human being to tease those things out on their own. You know, it's sort of like telling a programmer, hey, we're not going to give you a compiler. Find the bugs in your software on your own. It would be impossible. And unfortunately, that's what we're asking people to do in these complex work projects, is we're just sort of asking them an impossible task.
They get it right and be perfect the first time.
Yeah, catch all the unknowns.
Which brings us to, right, if you're not set up right, you can't forecast. So this brings us to the second thing that HR really needs to be thinking about, is not only having more integrity to the plans, but doing it in a way that you can actually see around corners and anticipate where there's going to be a problem. And this is something else that you've discovered just doesn't exist in a lot of the project planning software that folks have today.
Yeah, much like, Waze. We've become dependent on a lot of these other technologies. And once again, as we sort of talk about advancements using simple, discrete mathematical models, that's what Waze is. Your traffic guidance is looking at where the risks occur in your route to get something done. And your work management platform should be doing the same thing, identifying the risks between here and your destination, where those risks occur, where you have capacity delays, critical path risks. That's all manageable and trackable. That is the digital transformation that has to occur. And as you laid up early in the conversation, that's really why this transformation is getting forced forward now, because this is the next level of optimizing that process, is making sure that those risks early. It's sort of, you'd rather get a cavity filled than have root canal. And so you really want to find and identify those risks early.
So there's something that I just want to hit on. I was in a Twitter thread this morning, and I think the direction of this and where to focus might be surprising to a lot of people. That, like, okay, what do we do now? And the answer isn't you go and you immediately set up a work from home office, or you immediately take a look at your employee handbook and modify it, or you immediately change all your job descriptions to remove the photos of the foosball table that nobody can use with other photos, of at-home setups. The solution really starts with, think about how you are approaching the plan in the first place. And the thread I was a part of, a colleague of mine shared a survey result of what recruiters and recruiting managers are focused on right now. And saving cash and managing the business was not the first thing. It was still kind of the typical, we want to hire the best, and we've got employer branding stuff, and we've got messaging. And his take was, this is just, grist for the mill of how out of touch recruiting is. And my take was a little bit different. I said, actually, I think this is grist for the mill to show how slow organizations are to decentralize transformation activities. Because I think everybody knows, hey, we got to be doing stuff, but well, what should we be doing? And what you're talking about and what we're teeing up here is really this notion that it matters. The way in which we approach the work from the outset matters. And it's not just a question of running to go do a bunch of stuff. It's take a step back, engage your team, think differently about how you're doing the work, and approach it with an eye towards execution. Like all the stuff in front of us, we have to get it all done. But if we just run in and say, we got to do this, we got to do that, we're not going to get any of it done. We're going to end up with the same mess we always have. We need to step back, make sure that the plan has integrity. It's not a rat's nest of just a whole bunch of competing priorities. We need to be able to tease apart cause and effect so that we can see when we're going to be late. And that this is the key to actually moving into this new world, not any one specific thing that might end up being the subject of these plans. And it's as you're talking and as we're going through this, I'm realizing this is probably hitting a lot of people sideways. A lot of us never think about how we plan for our work. And you've made a complete study of this.
Yeah. It's and I think there's one other thing that you touched on too, which is sort of the role of HR and the role of the organization is obviously changing. I was on a call with other CEOs recently, and the topic was essentially the decision about, hey, how are we going to manage work as an organization at the end, and when are we coming back to work? Those decisions are made by the CEO, but someone has to effectuate that change in the organization. Someone has to shepherd the organization's process because the CEO isn't going to do that. The CEO is going to look to other leaders in the organization to say, okay, we have a different situation. We're not going to be using commercial real estate as much. How are we going to go across a diverse organization, maybe a multinational organization, and start to manage our performance, our process, and our execution in this new environment? Are we set up for that?
Well, and so I want to talk to you about this because this one, now we start to get in. We've got a couple items here which are kind of more squarely HR's domain. And when you talk about the CEO owning it and who's going to drive it and how we get this done, you've got an approach to that too. You've got a perspective on this that I find refreshing. And I'd love to hear kind of the backstory of where you built in a concrete offer and acceptance to tasks. And I feel this, right? So in 20 plus years of consulting, I can't tell you how much communications work I've done where I have tried to help people basically improve their influence. And the mythical thing that everybody tries to do at some point is write this perfect 4-paragraph email where they volunteer a VP from another department what to do. And it's got to be gentle enough that the person doesn't resent and react negatively to being voluntold what to do, but it has to be firm enough that the email can be used to hold the person accountable later. And it has to give enough detail that they can get started, but it has to be short enough to be read. And it has to be thorough enough that they know where to go looking for, the back story to get the work right. But it can't be so presumptuous that the person feels like, they're being treated like an idiot. And maybe we get that email right once in our life. And you look at this as a math problem, you're like, yeah, let's sidestep the entire thing. So where did that come from? Like when you look at how work gets done and where this notion of acceptance and or a lack of explicit acceptance impacts organizations, what did you find when you were researching this, and how did you approach solving it?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. For those of you on the webinar today, I think there probably, if you were to take away two learnings, and the thing that we found in our research, one is that math problem earlier in the slide. That is absolutely a law of gravity in work, and ignorance of that and not paying attention to that means you're going to be subject to the pain of the problems associated with it, right? The second
gravity
thing that we
holds
learned,
us down whether we believe it or not, right?
Yeah, exactly. and sometimes to very, very deleterious effects. The other thing that we learned was accountability is still a really big deal for organizations, and it's such a loaded term for people. Well, I'm accountable. You're accountable to everybody? What about your email box and forgetting to respond to people and even on important issues? What we learned was in organizations that, and the research has shown this, that between a manager and their subordinate, both directions, 80% of the people felt, hey, I'm accountable to my manager's accountable to me. But when they talked about peers in their organization, neighboring departments or peer organizations, it dropped to 10%. Well, does that mean that just they luckily happen to have a great relationship with their manager and that? No, it means the process of accountability is fundamentally broken. And if you go back to that, and we're not going to go back to that slide, but when you talk about the precipitous drop, when you say 10%, 10%, they feel at a 10% level there's accountability. There's no way people are performing at a 95% level to do your work for you on your project, and that's damaging. So we understood this issue, and we've seen great traction around this idea of gently introducing uniform accountability around the work. Hey, and transparency. Hey, do you agree to do this or not? It's okay. You can say no, but don't blow me off. I need to know that I'm being blown off so I can find another resource. And that's unfortunately a big problem in organizations, and existing solutions don't underscore this issue of, I have to know that you have the ball on this. If you don't, I need to know who does. Because at some point I'm going to be in a meeting and this task is going to be on the critical path and we're going to go, I didn't get the email, I didn't see it, or I'm sorry, I forgot about that. And so this just improves the odds. And once again, we can see this just improves execution, where everyone says, yep, I get it. Yes, I see what the work is. I agree to do it.
It would be wonderful.
Or no, I can't. I'm underwater. You've given me too much.
Right. Well, look, that's one, it's kind of meta, but that's one where it would be wonderful to see HR take the lead and just champion accountability. And if you're an HR business partner, be in a position to actually just grease the skids, make sure that the work that people are signing up for gets done. And and Mike, if I'm reading between the lines with you, when you talk about this, it's not just like, hey, once a year did I meet my goals for my for my performance review. It's much more granular. You're talking week in and week out. When I'm sitting at a status meeting, you're saying things fall apart because I get called on what's the status, and I'm like, yeah, no status because I don't know if so-and-so is going to take it. And you're saying that right there is the problem that needs to be fixed. In that moment, we can't have a week go by with no status because we don't know where it stands.
Well, and there's another side to this coin that of accountability. Everyone thinks, we've talked to organizations and like, oh, accountability sounds like Big Brother. We're saying, yeah, there's another side to this coin. Accountability is your amazing, quiet contributors in your organization who are accountable and responsible for your success. So accountability and responsibility go hand in hand. And right now, without that, and that goes to that next point of connectivity and transparency, without understanding who's really doing the work, especially in a COVID environment, then you start to lack the ability to say, hey, look, we have to recognize the people who are really responsible for moving the organization forward. So accountability is not necessarily a monitoring thing. Accountability is a recognition and should be presented to the organization as an opportunity to recognize achievement in the organization and how things are getting done.
So is it helpful? Is this something that companies would benefit from, focusing on just understanding what the flow of work is across teams? And how, I know you're going to say, yeah, it's like, how?
Right. So there are a lot of elements associated with this, but and once again, there are, like everything, there are two sides to this. It is one, the organization and the leadership of organizations understanding who's doing the work, where that critical work is being done. But another really important element is, hey, I want to know that my work is relevant. You're telling me to do stuff. How does that fit into the bigger picture of the organization and the strategy? I'm just getting stuff thrown over a fence at me? How important is that? Who's seeing this work and my efforts? And does it matter that I'm working till, working really hard to focus to get these things done? And as, per your story early on about the university saying, hey, you can't work from home, I know a lot of people right now, and this is happening in a lot of organizations, people are having to deal with childcare right now they're working in the evenings. They're working on the weekends. They're making those exceptions. They are going above and beyond. And, without the ability, and maybe that's going on at that university, but they've got no visibility into that, so they just make the assumption those people aren't productive, right? That's the errors that are occurring, right? We're making lots of assumptions because we have no data. Oh, how can smoking be bad for us? Well, we don't have the x-rays to show what it's doing to the lung.
Yeah, blueberries were healthy before we knew what antioxidants were, right?
Right.
Now the technology and the math catch up, and we can show it. So, do you worry about unintended consequences that that now that we're going remote and people can't see what I'm doing, that we're going to have a whole lot of more politicking and people kind of boasting what they're working on? Or if an organization were to put into place a technology to be able to visualize work the way that you have it here, like if I'm up in the 1 o'clock position and I just have a couple of lines, am I going to be carving my work out into a million tasks so that all of a sudden I've got the most lines connecting me to other people? Do you worry about those kinds of unintended consequences, or not?
So sometimes data reveals an interesting new story to us that we weren't aware of, but in many cases the data just validates what we already know. Someone might be working on one task, but in many cases we're still social animals. We still communicate. People are going to go, you know what, that is the single most important task. We're all okay that they're working on one task. In other instances, we're going to go, hey, this is kind of evidencing what we knew all along, that this person isn't doing the thing, isn't pulling their weight where the rest of the team is. So there's always, this is about augmenting the human experience, not replacing it, right? And providing better transparency and communication in that process.
Which kind of leads to the last point. We're going to poll everybody here in a second, but this one kind of just builds from what you were just talking about. That if you actually have better insight into what people are working on, then, again, this gets to the heart of what HR is. You've got better capacity estimates. So your headcount, your anticipated headcount, you get better. Your anticipated workload requirements, your load balancing requirements, all get more accurate. So I can see where switching to a data-driven approach away from kind of a more interpersonal, what do we think approach would certainly not only help with connectivity and transparency and accountability, but just in planning, which is the heart of what the people organization does in a lot of these companies.
Yeah. Capacity is a big challenge and problem for people because, as you said, it's sort of a back of the napkin kind of thing. And we talk about what is real world capacity. Real world capacity deals with the fact that you're going to be gone next Wednesday afternoon because you've got to take your mother to the hospital, or you've been pulled into a project by the CEO because there's a board meeting coming up. That's on your calendar. It's not in anyone's project plan, and you took on 6 other things from another department. That is a knowable problem, but unfortunately isn't communicated. And so having data-driven, a real insight around real-world capacity management is important, and it's important for one big reason, and I think this is a common topic in the HR community when we think about employee wellness. The big part about employee wellness is your best people can't say no. So they just say yes. Oh, you want? Yeah, sure, I can do that. Hey, can you get this done by this? Wow, they're great. Susan's amazing. Yeah. She gets everything done on time, and well, yeah, because Susan's staying up until midnight every night. And of course she says yes with a smile on her face because she's an amazing employee. But you're blind to the fact that you are pounding her into oblivion because you don't understand the data side of it. So that's another big issue that we see as solvable.
So normally I'm an optimist, but on this, there's one thing that I'm a bit of a pessimist on, which is human nature is predictably glitchy in some ways. And one of those ways is that we tend to see the world the way we want it to be, as opposed to what is. We see what should be, as opposed to what is. Like that university saying, hey, if you're working from home, you can't take care of the kids while you're working. Yeah, sure, it should be that I have this hermetically sealed office in my house, but that's not the way the world is. And by the way, even if I want it to be like that, I got a 17-year-old, I got a 15-year-old, I got an 11-year-old. What am I? I'm going to say no, right? How big of a jerk am I going to be to my kids every single day before they're like, what? So the way the world is not as it should be, and it is a challenge. This is not one that in years of consulting, I've been able to consistently solve. And it goes back to your project paradox slide, that there's a line on it, that individual excellence doesn't scale. We all have our developmental plans. We all have our journeys. But whether or not our journey is going to unlock at the pace that's needed for business, that's an open question. And what's just happened, and again, going back to the slide that had the lunchroom that was filled and the empty desk, what's happened is we've just compressed the time frame that business needs to make these changes on. So we really can't wait for human nature to catch up. This is an area where I hate to say it, but HR would really benefit from using technology as a crutch to get through this transition. Because you're right, like the capacity, I'm just going to say, of course I'm going to say yes. I had one of my first boss was an entrepreneur, well-known guy in Chicago, and I tried managing up early. I got the advice, like, I have 168 hours in a week, and here's what you've given me to do, and which should I work on? And I remember him just looking at me and going, your job is to figure out how to jam 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag. And I just looked at him and I went, okay, so much for that. So the fact that we've reached that point where technologically we can bring the facts to the table and make them irrefutable is pretty exciting. It means we can maybe use some technology to nudge out of the should world, get into the world as it is, and then actually take care of our people a little bit better, get better plans, get better capacity planning, and take care of them. All right, so for everybody who's made it this far, thank you. We're going to take a minute before we switch gears and actually, Mike, I have a question for you, and you don't need to pull up the software to do this. I want to know exactly why we haven't been focused on this in the past, and I know that you have a view that few people are familiar with that'll help bring to life why execution is such a problem for businesses. But before we do that, I want to throw this out to the audience. When it comes to executing remotely, what is most missing from your current project management capabilities? Is it accuracy? Is it having that single source of truth and knowing that you can rely on the information that's in it? Is it connectivity? Is it having those structured communications where you're not chasing down, you get a team that's connected, and you're not necessarily chasing down, is it in email? Is it in text? Is it in Slack? Is it in Teams? But your team is actually connected and knows what it's supposed to be working on. Is it accountability, where you have visibility into who's doing what? Is it forecasting? Your ability to actually look ahead and concretely tell what's coming and where problems lie? Or is it capacity planning? Is it related to your understanding of who's got room to engage on more? And we'll leave that open for just another moment and then grab the results. Riley, I'm assuming you're hearing this and you're going to close this here in a moment for us. And Mike, while everyone is doing this, quick question for you. You run a company. What's your team's biggest challenge?
So, as a technology company, we have some of the benefit of being equipped, and we transformed to this quickly. But I will tell you, as a sort of a leader, when I started my career almost 30 years ago, I was given advice by someone who was just leaving their career, and they said, for people to be successful, they just need two things. That's it, two things: aptitude and desire, right? And then they'll be successful. And so for us as an organization, we have to make sure that people have they have the personal aptitude to achieve the things they want to achieve, but that we also have the tools in place for their aptitude to be realized, right? It isn't just enough for them to be able to do it. We have to make sure that we've set the table so they can execute and they can deliver that. And then the desire part, which is the bigger challenge in this process, is making sure they continue to have desire. And the desire comes about by getting that connective tissue back in place, letting them know how relevant they are to the efforts that we're moving forward as a business. Because sometimes that's difficult when they're in the back guest room or in the frog at home wondering, hey, is what I'm doing really matter to the organization as much anymore? I'm not getting pulled aside by the SVP to go meet the CEO or talk to somebody else. So, we do focus on sort of those two areas about, continuing to promote aptitude and desire.
So you know what? Which is a nice way of saying there's elements of all of these in what you need. We've got the results up, and I'm smiling. The next time we do this webinar, we're going to start with the accountability slide. 32%.
It's not a surprise to me.
Right? Let's just start there. Because here's the thing. We all feel that this is not a surprise, but it is so important and it's so hard. This gets to another glitch of human nature. Accountability is one of those things. First of all, it leads to trust, and trust is the single biggest driver of culture. No trust, no nothing. You can
Right.
do a lot of stuff, but if I don't trust my leadership, I'm not following you. You're no longer my leader. We just have a transactional relationship. I'm going to do some work. I'm going to get a paycheck, and I'm gone. So for any company that is culture-oriented, that wants to maintain culture in a remote workforce, establishing trust is paramount, and that comes through accountability. People around me do what they say they're going to do. I get appropriately recognized for my work. But here's the thing. Accountability is also one of those things that we all, like data, we want it from far away. From far away, this looks awesome. I want accountability. When it gets right up to you, it starts to get squirrely, right? Because now it's like Big Brother. Accountability,
Right.
get off me. Now it feels like micromanagement. So, it's one of these areas where I really do feel like a little bit of technology goes a long way to solving that problem. Because it's not just me and you talking where you feel like I'm micromanaging and I'm feeling like you're not getting the work done and we have to negotiate this. We actually now have tools that we can be like, let's go to the replay. Let's look and see what's actually going on, and let's look at it together. But as long as we live in a world where I'm going to give you 10 things to do, knowing I'm giving you time to do 5 of them, we have a problem because you're going to come back, point at the 5 you did. I'm going to point at the 5 you didn't do, and
Right.
we're kind of screwed. So,
Yep.
I love the fact that accountability kind of pops to the top. It aligns with my personal experience with this. It aligns with my favorite part.
It's a solvable problem.
The software. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
It's a solvable problem.
So with that, I would love, the question I have for you is, why haven't people seen this? We have so many tools. What is wrong with the tools we have? We're using these, and we don't yet see it. So I'm gonna give you control of this, and we have limited time. So I just help with that one thing. Why? Tell me why we're not all just idiots that we haven't been able to figure this out. Make me feel like, okay, phew, at least there's a reason why I haven't been able to, so we can see my work in a way that lets me see the execution problem.
Yeah, well, a couple of things, and I guess I'll say, when you think about accountability, like I said, it's such a squirrely problem. So one of the things that we said early on, and the people who have been using our platform would say, right now, I guess maybe let me give a quick orientation. So I'm logged into Susan Lang. I'm looking at my desktop. The platform curates information for you. That's a big part of. Unfortunately, we have a lot of noise in our daily lives with email and communication and chat platforms, what we'll call unstructured communication, where you're, the same chat channel may be talking about, having a Zoom happy hour as well as, getting board information together. So one of the things that Movable really focuses on doing is curating information for the user. So I'm looking at my desktop. I've got pending my acceptance. I'll talk about that. That's accountability. Your overdue task, due in the next 5 days, right? So we want to start to curate those things. But to your point, pending my acceptance, what does that mean? So I'm going to click on this task here, and I'm being asked, I can't do anything on this until I accept or reject it. And this is really, I'm going to talk about acceptance and rejectance because this simple action lets everybody know, hey, I looked at this. I saw what the work was, the requirement, and I either hit accept or reject. And if I don't agree with it, or I can put a quick chat message in and say, not sure I have the time, and that chat message is going to go to the assigner. So the person who's assigned that to me is going to see that immediately. They're going to understand that. But here's the point on accountability. This goes both directions. There's no switch where you turn this off and say, well, I want to be able to force my employees to do work. Because there's a problem when you do that. Like when you say, look, this is the honor system. You either accept or reject it. You can assign it. And this happens here in our business. When people assign stuff to me, I have to stop and go, do I have time for that? I stop and think, can I commit to this? And if I can't, I have to let them know.
within the context of what you were talking about earlier with remote work, this doesn't exist, but this feels like something that is more needed in remote land than in in-person land. You were talking about how there's no safety net. We don't run into people anymore. So without this, the world very much becomes a matter of Wild West. Like, we really don't know who's doing what and who's signed up for work.
Yeah. This is I have the ball. This is I have the ball, or I don't have the ball. I can't take it. I've got too much work, and that becomes transparent, right? And this chat channel on the right does something. All chat is contextual in the platform. So we have historical record of the communication. And once again, you're not searching for the communication about this piece of work. It's right there for you. And these dashboards are customizable, and you can look at it in chart form, and you can modify that. But let's look at an organized effort in a more structured process. And in that case, we can come into the project portfolio view. So I'm looking at, and now this is the project portfolio. On the left-hand side, the top task is my task. Then it's project portfolio, and then teams, and then a notification center. But right now, I'm looking, and I've got a dashboard set up that curates the work that I'm concerned about. My projects with high priority delays, projects with block tasks, forecasted late. So we talked about that critical path engine. One of the things that the software does is it forecasts based using a discrete math engine to understand, hey, you think this project is due February 17th. It's actually going to come in March 18th based on what we know to be true right now today. So you're going to be 13 days late. This is the problem that people realize is you get around February 16th and you go, hey, are we going to get on time? No, we're going to be 2 weeks late. What do you mean we're going to? Well, now we just figured out looking at the plan we're going to be 2 weeks late. Well, wasn't that knowable? Yeah, it was knowable. So let's dig in and talk a little more about what I mean around that. So I'm going to jump, and I'm actually going to switch my view here. And everybody's familiar with this view. So this is Accurate Inc. They're implementing something. This is a traditional project plan, right? Yeah, it's a Gantt chart. Everyone knows what a Gantt chart looks like. And project managers love them. And we have that in the platform. But the
how do you know from this? How do you know from this that something's going to be 13 days late?
Right. And how do you know what you should be focusing on, right? Because at the end of the day, there's a million things you could do and a million problems you could solve. What's the single most important problem? And, if I were to ask people on the call, like, can you quickly glance at, you think it's a ridiculous notion for me to say, can you quickly identify the number one problem in this project? No. The answer is no. Well,
Mike, so the question that I get from this, can you jump back to, all right, yep. So Steve, and then I got a question for you after I jumped in right before your big reveal. So no, I can't see that something's going to be 13 days late from this. Like I know that I've got dependencies, right? That's one thing that's going to cascade and make other things late.
Right.
But that's all I see.
Oh, Jason,
but you
there?
See something different.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is, and one of the things we really focus on is human-machine interface. We realized that one of the other problems was the ability to simply, human beings, to identify things in a complex situation. And to be honest, this is not a complex project. This is a small project compared to what HR deals with in large organizations on a regular basis. But it's still not possible to visualize and go, what's the thing we need to be focusing on? So I'll jump over to, we've got something called the critical path engine. And what the critical path engine is this discrete math engine. And what it does is it automatically organizes that Gantt chart. And if I were to ask everybody, okay, find where you think the problem is now. You've never used this software. You have no idea what it is. You have no idea what this project is. But if I were to ask you,
a red circle around it.
Yeah, the big red circle, right? Client ERM spec is approval. It's now saying it's not going to be done on the 28th. So this idea of being able to visualize that, drill into that detail and go, okay, this is the problem that we're dealing with. Because why? Because it's on the critical path. It's on the top, that shortest path. And right now, this project says...
Yeah, here, I'm going to jump in just because I know we only have a few minutes left, and we're getting a couple questions that are coming in, and so I want to bring those questions out. I'm looking at this, and I can tell the difference between a task that, if it's late, is going to make the whole project late, versus a task that, if it's late, it's going to be a few days late, and who really cares because it's just that one task. So helps for a project, but as the world goes to remote, can I use this for ad hoc work, or does it have to be a project?
No, it can be used as ad hoc work as well. I do want to just touch on one thing before I jump away from this, Jason, is we know this task is late. Well, what's the impact of that? And unfortunately, most people don't understand that. Well, the impact of this task cascades, and instead of it being 5 days late, we now know, hey, it's going to be 28 days late. Don't you want to inform people early, hey, this isn't going to be 5 days late. It's going to be 28 days late, and there's costs associated with that. So, a big part of it is identifying where those dynamics occur through easy visualization. Same thing when you're talking about team dynamics and structure, to understand sociographic work and how that work gets processed in an organization and team. This goes back to accountability as well, right? Where do those relationships exist? But I can stop there. There's a lot, obviously, in the platform we could talk about, but I want to leave a few minutes for questions that folks may have here at the end.
So we've talked about a lot of big concepts, and I'll own the pessimism around whether or not individuals can sort of develop their way through the challenges. So if a company were to say, look, I'm going to go with Movable, or I'm going to go with the Movable competitor, but I'm going to change the way that I think about work, and I'm going to start structuring it around teams and with accountability. How hard is it to transition? Is this a heavy lift?
No, it's actually, honestly, the first step of the digital transformation that we tell people around this is smart work starts with a smart plan, right? You have to begin at the beginning. And it is about, and one of the things that the software focuses on is helping you start with a smart plan so you've got structure for success in the beginning. And that is the biggest, if there was one thing that organizations could solve, is start with a good set of directions. People just aren't starting with a good set of directions. And you'd be amazed at the statistical and mathematical improvement of success that occurs when you start with a good plan, because you identify the problems, the success, the capacity risks. All those things are knowable. And it's actually much easier than it sounds. Like I said, you're storing the data already in a spreadsheet, in an email, on a yellow Post-it. The same little bits of information, I got to do this thing, I think that person's going to do it, and this has to be done first. That's what you need to know. That's all you need to know.
And as an HR leader, who should I have do this plan? Do I need to go into a room and figure out all the workflows and lay this out? Or can I actually engage my team and say, document your workflows as best you can and feed them to me and go from there? And kind of put myself in a position of compiling.
Yeah.
It is a capability and skill.
Yeah. No. It's not a 1 or a 0. Like, this is the capability that you build. You start at the beginning. You become more. It's like any skill. You have to start practicing. You're not going to be amazing at it in the beginning, but there's not a steep learning curve.
Look, you've got an engineering background. You're a developer. So debugging is part of your process, standard operating procedure, right? And I think HR, that's news for a lot of people. We expect to get the people stuff perfect. And we have a culture right now that doesn't give a lot of slack for imperfection. So, it would be, now I'll be optimistic. The one thing that I definitely would recommend is if a company wanted to take your advice and say, look, we need smarter plans and we need to do this, I would encourage them to include everybody. Don't go behind closed doors to make the plan. Invite the team, compile it, admit that it's going to be wrong out of the gate, right? Like, use a piece of software to do an integrity check to see what the, if the step is late, does it ripple through the entire thing? Because the more transparent you are, the more leeway people will give you to make mistakes. If you're transparent about it and you're like, look, we're not going to get this right, let's start someplace and go, great. Then people will grow with you. And if you don't, that's when people tend to mistrust. And so in the interest of time, I want to leave it there. Mike, thank you so much for showing that, for talking about the aspects of kind of where HR moves to. And just to recap them again, like the key takeaway that I'm taking away is we have a problem with how teams operate. And so if all we do is just jump from task to task to task, we carry that problem with us into everything we try to do. The best thing we can do to be kind to ourselves is focus on the business of execution first, make sure that our teams are set up for success whatever they do, and that entails planning in a way that allows us to establish clear accountability, see who's doing what, connect our teams in a way that makes sense, create these org charts, like let's put the team together, create that transparency, connect the dots between tasks so we can actually forecast capacity and forecast risk. And if we do that, then all the work we need to do gets done more effectively and more efficiently. Would you say that's a fair recap?
I think that's a fair recap. Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate all the time that you spent today and just your insights on this whole process. And thank you, everybody on the call and the webinar as well.
Thank you.